Welcome to PolyCast, where we explore the innovations, challenges, and opportunities shaping the polyurethane industry. And joining me today is Brad Beauchamp, the President and Chief Executive of Carpenter Company and Vice Chair of the Centre for the Polyurethanes Industry Steering Committee. Brad, thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to our conversation about polyurethanes.
Excellent, thank you. And in sunny St. Louis. So, Brad, I suppose the best way to start with this kind of conversation is for you to tell me a little bit about the work that CPI does, the Centre for the Polyurethanes Industry, and what kind of work you're doing in the industry.
Sure. So the Center for Polyurethane Industry is a subgroup underneath the ACC, which is American Chemistry Council, which represents all the chemical manufacturers in the United States on a variety of plastics and other materials, not just polyurethanes. And then there's a subgroup called CPI, Center for Polyurethanes, underneath it. And this year, CPI, this is our 67th conference. So we've been going on for quite a long time. So the industry, I think the way we talked about it before, 90 years old, I think polyurethane as a technology.
Yes.
So, not 30 some years into it, we're having conferences and as an industry working on fundamentally what we're trying to do is expand the use of polyurethanes in all kinds of markets. But that involves not just advocating for the materials, but it also involves advocating on regulatory issues, on safety, worker safety, all those kind of things, compliance, a wide variety of topics that impact the industry and impact the availability or the interest in polyurethane as a material overall. And that can be in flexible foam, which Carpenter is primarily involved in, but rigid foams, case, which is coatings, adhesives, sealants, elastomers. So a wide variety of polyurethane technologies.
And as you mentioned there, polyurethane, I think, is 90 years old in 2027, which coincides nicely with our New Tech Europe show, actually. So hopefully putting some kind of celebration of our industry.
Yeah, that would be great.
You mentioned there, you touched upon product stewardship and safety education, which I guess are two of the roles of CPI. So can you tell me about any sort of recent education programs or how product stewardship is actually being actioned?
Sure. So there is, of course, always through the CPI and the website, there's always materials available. If you're new into the industry as a person or as a company, you can get access to information about how to safely handle the materials, all those kind of things on the website. But then in addition, at the conference here, there are seminars and trainings that go on leading up to the days of the actual conference and around the conference where people can get more information on the polyurethanes, on again, safety handling, uses, those kinds of things, training. So people get more familiar with the materials because it's not pretty common around the world, even that people would have a lot of training specifically, even if you were a chemistry major, chemical engineering major, you don't really spend a lot of time on polyurethane. So it's kind of a new material. So the programs that we have in place are ways to get people more aware of the materials, how to handle them, how to work with them, those kinds of things.
Okay. So do you work with colleges, universities, that to get the future of our industry? Because we heard some conversations this morning at the CPI conference here, the conference here, that there's a lack of forward thinking in terms of talent, in the long term, people getting into the industry. So what's your role in that respect with educating the future?
Yeah, and you're right. And this morning, the keynote speaker was pointing out more from a North American US perspective, just the general workage shortage. I mean, we can all think about baby boomers that are older now and will be retiring. And are there enough of the rest of us to kind of work in whatever industry it is? So that was one of the themes was there's a shortage and how do you get people involved? It's a challenge, and it has been a challenge to get very urethane specific industries. There's some universities that do pretty well with that, but then there are others that just have it as a general plastics kind of course and things like that. I can remember I was a biology and chemistry major in college, and we had a lab about like nylons and polyurethanes and stuff. So you have a little bit, but not a lot.
Yeah.
And so what you find is people coming in, there's an interest in it. they find it kind of a very interesting material to see and work with, but there isn't a lot of background in
Mm,
history and training. And so then you kind of step up to that. And historically, a lot of the major companies back in the day did a lot of their own training as well.
mm,
And that so CPI relies on people who've been in the industry a long time to help proctor those courses to help people. So you're getting the benefit of somebody who's had a lot of experience in the industry in a classroom setting or in a
mm.
conference talking to you about the real world aspects of what they did with the material.
Yeah. And is it changing quickly enough, do you think, in that respect? Because, I mean, it's a fascinating industry. I mean, I've only been involved for under a year, and previous to this, I was in the plastic packaging industry, and there was many of the same issues there,
Yeah.
really. Um, but I knew very little about polyurethanes, and only from entering the industry, I realised just how many places it is,
Yeah.
and how important it is to all of our lives. Um, but the general consumer or the general member of the public has no idea. They have no idea about the materials. So getting the youth involved and understanding what these materials are all about is key, really, isn't it? Because otherwise, they just generally don't have a clue.
Right. Yeah, it's really pretty fascinating when you think about it. As you mentioned, you're getting into the industry. There's people who haven't been in before who come into the industry and they're just amazed at
Mm,
all the different places. I've been fortunate. I've been in the industry for a really long time. I won't give away my age or how long, but I've always every year there's new people coming in with new ideas for a product or for an adjustment to a product. I mean, it's pretty easy for us to think, well, I've seen foam in my mattress or my sofa, and you just assume it's the same stuff that was
mm,
there in the 1990s or in the 80s. It's not, it's completely different. The foams that we're using today for like a bed in a box mattress are not the same foams that we were selling 10 years ago. So you just look at that innovation and how do you get people
yeah,
to get up to speed and to understand it. There's various at the CPI here. There's some new technical sessions that are going on. Some are around bio-based materials.
yeah,
A lot of materials. I think it's is it 35% of the panel discussions are around sustainability or
right.
recyclability issues, which is always first and foremost. When people find out, hey, I've got these products. What do we do with them at end of
Mm,
life? Or how do we make them greener when we're creating them? To use the broad sense of the term greener, right?
yeah,
And I think that's where you see the industry has been pivoting the last few years is to build through the CPI, at the conference, these kind of panel discussions and other things, so you can learn from others
yeah,
what somebody at Dow is doing, or what somebody at Huntsman's doing, or
right.
BASF, or even the Innovation Award is a great example of that. We had two of them this year. We had Algenesis and we
Yeah,
had ICP. You could vary in the nuance of what they were offering, but one was a bio-based solution and one was a solution about shelf life stability. And you might think of, well, how does that play into renewability or whatever? Well, if the material deactivates in a short period of time, what are you doing with it? Throwing it away.
yeah,
So by allowing it to have a longer shelf life, right, you're in some ways helping positively impact the sustainability of the
mm,
product. And so it's neat to see that those innovation awards are really the last couple of years have been really oriented toward kind of the sustainability
yeah.
or circularity side of things.
And in terms of geographical in terms of geographical idiocracies, um, do you find that some of the projects that you see, or some of the sort of sustainable movements you see in North America or the States, are fundamentally different to what's happening in Europe? Are there areas where North America is ahead, or and vice versa? Do you see in that conversation?
Yeah, I think there are differences. The Europeans in general, I would say, are further ahead on recycling and sustainability. And
Yeah.
things like CSRD and those regulatories are more imminent than you would
Mm,
see in the United States. But that's a good area where the CPI interacts with the European organizations like Europe or or
Okay.
other international groups to talk about those and bring those issues together because the challenges are not different, even if the regulatory frameworks and timings might be a little different,
Yeah.
or the way in which a country or region might be going about the solving of the problem,
Mm.
or like you say, regulating about it is different, but
Yep.
the objectives are still the same. The objectives are, how do we get to a product that is more sustainable? Meaning, is it more recoverable at the end? Can it be put back into the system and reused in some fashion? And then how is it being designed on the front end and in the production processes as well? And those are issues that are common around the world, and they're just moving at different paces with different levels of regulation. And it's a challenge as a company to work on those, but that's where the CPI as an organization, what we're doing is meeting together all the producers and talking about those common issues that are affecting the industry as a whole. And so it's
Yeah.
a great opportunity as a working group to solve some of those problems, work on them in the broader sense.
Yeah.
And then each of the individual companies goes about kind of solving the problems in their own way.
Yeah. So, and on that subject of regulators, how is the CPI addressing concerns that are raised by regulators and also by the public? I mean, some of the things that I've witnessed in my sort of days in the industry, things like spray foam, emissions, spray foam problem. Some of the views that are taken about spray foam in Europe are very different to perhaps what we see here in the States. Um, Things like new car smell, and I was at a presentation earlier where we were talking about how important smell is
Mhm.
in this industry. Um, how are you dealing with those kind of concerns from the public and regulators? And what are those concerns that are coming at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's in the United States, there's kind of really two distinct kind of regulatory type situations. There's the national, right, which is the federal government, and those are things that are related to. And then you have individual states that are adopting. There would be things like EPR, extended producer responsibility rules, and sometimes those rules are in direct conflict with what I would consider good practices, right? They're kind of working against themselves. They're trying to achieve a broader good end goal, but the way they're going about it sometimes it negatively impacts
Yeah.
the situation. And so the CPI then works at the local level or at the state level to address those issues and try to explain to the regulators why that solution that they're proposing, like a one size fits all, doesn't really make sense for a class of products. Like you're mentioning spray foam, right? So you can say, hey, I want to regulate spray foams, or I want to regulate PFAS
Yeah.
materials in a broad sense, but not realizing that under that classification, there are blowing agents that are used for insulating that save you thousands of dollars a year in energy costs.
Yeah.
And if you write the rules broad enough, you're going to eliminate these products, and so you're going to hurt yourself while you're trying to help yourself. And so we see that a lot more. The CPI sees that a lot more on the state level.
Yeah.
It's enough on the federal level to get the federal rules, but then a state like California or Illinois or New York wants to jump ahead and do their own thing, and then that's where the CPI really, as a member company, we see the benefit. They're stepping in on that level and able to help and work and address that collectively.
Similar to, because I, s- I remember in my latter days in the packaging industry, the big push for EPR in the packaging industry, and just the quirks across different states. And I guess what you're trying to do is kind of steer the schemes in the way that best suits the industry players. And of course, what I see here is that a lot of that's happening in mattresses
Mhm.
in this industry, where there are schemes that are dead in the water at the moment. There are schemes that are happening in certain states. But what's the CPI's role then in kind of trying to steer the regulations to what suits your members?
Yeah, well, you certainly have very clearly situations where whatever's being proposed is really counter current to what's out there. Like, in the federal level, there's already SNAP approvals for these blowing agents. And then you have a legislation in Washington State or in Minnesota where they're trying to work against that, which would actually outlaw it. So then you're going to them and explaining, hey, this really isn't working how you think it's going to work. And then you have the other situations where a lot of times what you see, and this isn't just unique to governments, it's companies do this too, where they set goals, but they're really aspirational.
Mm,
So you'd say, well, by 2030, we're going to do this. And you'd say, well, I'm in 2025. I don't see how in 5 years we're going to get
mm,
there. And the government officials are like, well, we put that really stretch goal out there so that they'll make some level of improvement. The problem as a company or as an industry is you're trying to judge that, are they going to shift the goalposts or are they not? Because you can tell them today this isn't feasible, and not get a lot of
mm.
traction until it starts getting closer to the end date where you're saying, gosh, this just isn't.
Yeah.
And so as a group going to those legislators and saying, this is the challenge. I know what you're asking for, but we really can't get there realistically in the time horizon that you have.
And also, I think that's important because it kind of reminds me of a lot of the targets that were set in the packaging industry, for example, when everyone had these 2025 targets, and a lot of companies, whether it's some of the converters, but a lot of brand owners would set very, very sort of bold targets, not meet them, and have to 2 years a year ahead of the deadline retract them, and then they get a lot of
Mhm.
ire from the public, from the press, from all corners because, well, they clearly aren't meeting those targets. So, as an industry, you're kind of trying to push you towards certain targets, but it's got, as you say, it's got to be realistic.
Yeah, and it's a challenge, right? And there's a you see quite often in Europe or in the US, Canada,
Mm,
where public companies get put under a lot of pressure by shareholders, by others to make these declarative statements. We're going to be carbon
yeah,
neutral, or we're going to be whatever by net zero by 2030. And the company I work for, we're private, so we don't have the similar kinds of pressures. So when I look at it from the outside, I'm like, well, you're setting a very robust goal. The
mm,
downside, as you mentioned, is you've made this goal, you're a public company. People look at that. And then when you have to back off of that, then there's a little bit of a credibility gap.
mm,
And so what you've introduced is to, well, they'll say anything. And as an industry, what we're trying to focus on is the real science and saying what is really
yeah,
achievable and what kind of commitments do we feel like we can make, mindful of the fact that as an organization, we're a group of members, so each member has to kind of make their own declarative statements. You can't just go
yeah,
out as the ACC or the CPI and say we're doing
of
this, right?
course, yeah,
Because that's not the role that we're playing in it. But the role is to kind of then but work as a collective to say to the legislature, "Hey, I think what you're doing is admirable, but it's
yeah,
too far. You're going too far. We need to bring this into a more realistic." And of course, as you know,
mm,
in advocacy sides, you have NGOs and other people who are on the other side saying,
yeah.
"Do this, do this, do this." So it's kind of a push and pull conflict on.
Are there any areas where your members kind of come together and collaborate? Because I know there's that sort of push and pull thing where there's elements of, well, okay, we want to do the things our way,
Yeah.
but in
Well,
terms of collaboration, what's the main areas that you're seeing?
sure, you certainly see around the regulatory. We talked about PFAS,
Yeah,
but there are other things about pending regulations, whether it can be acrylonitrile, it can be 1,4-dioxane, it can be these other things where you're looking at it saying, are the goals and things being set properly? So all the member companies are in agreement that this is how we should be working,
mm,
that whatever they're proposing needs to be adjusted because of either it's not realistic or
yeah,
whatever those situations are. So you have those where you have that common interest.
mm,
And then within the CPI, right, we have a common interest on polyurethanes in general. So if it comes to insulation materials and other
yeah,
stuff, right? So you look for those areas where there's a common interest among the for a particular issue,
mhm,
and you try and look at it. And then the polyurethane is, we talked about how old it is. It's also a pretty significant. I think the direct economic numbers. I'm looking at some people here so they can nod to me with it, but I think it's $36 billion. Do we have that right on the? I think that's what I had in front of me. It was, yeah, $34.8 billion in direct economics in the United States.
right,
And then when you start flowing that through, right?
yeah,
So we talked about mattresses, right? And it goes into automobiles and it goes into trucks and everything else. And then you start getting into a total economic value of $360 billion, right? So it's a big impact that it has.
so
And
big.
obviously there's collective issues that we all want to kind of address for that market and the
Yeah.
downstream effects of it.
While we're on the subject of figures, I was looking at some figures that CPI published last year, um, which stated that polyurethane support 325,000 jobs and $113 billion in economic output across the US. Um, so, if I could ask you, where do you see the strongest growth opportunities coming from in this industry over the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. Well, certainly the major polyurethane segments
Mm,
relate to construction,
yep,
and that construction happens both at when the buildings are being created, right? So in the very beginning, you have things that are coatings or adhesives, or as the building's going along, you have insulation materials, and then
yep,
as you come to finish a building, you have outfitting the building with carpet, and you have it with furniture and things like that. So polyurethanes is really actively involved, whether it's residential or commercial, all the way throughout the process. And so that's an area of focus. And we look at how is construction, how's the
mhm,
construction environment, automotive or other transportation, very big. We all flew on planes to get here, right? There's urethane in the seats. We all wish after a few hours of plane ride, we wish there's a little thicker foam in the seats, but that's a subject for another day. But you look at that, you look at truck transportation, the cabs
yeah,
of trucks, you look at automotive, and in automotive, it's used whether it's an ICE vehicle, a plug-in hybrid, or an
mm,
EV, right? It's not like only EVs get the urethane. Urethane is throughout, no matter which car is being
yeah,
produced. So you look at those issues and challenges, and those are the markets. Then you mentioned packaging. Packaging is a significant share of the market as well, where you're looking and saying, okay, is the urethane the right material to carry this
yes,
item to its destination? How does that involve? And then you start getting into smaller devices, footwear,
yeah,
medical devices, filtrations, all those kinds of things that kind of
mm,
fit it out. But, so really the polyurethane is almost, as you mentioned, getting involved in it.
mm,
You were shocked at how many places that it is, right? I mean, if we were standing in the lobby and we watched people walk by, we might be able to pick out all the different ways that polyurethanes is there, from the belt and the shoes they might have, to the padding and the jackets, to the car they took to get here, to the room they're going up to that has the sofa and the bed. I mean, it is really everywhere. And so as an
yeah,
industry, we're really proud of that. But we also want to make sure that the people, officials and others,
mm,
understand that impact that it has on society at large and on employment, right?
mm,
The other way to kind of continue marching towards sustainability is improving the outcomes for
yeah,
people so that they can make better choices, with the resources that they have.
yeah. It's interesting. I think we employment was touched upon this morning by Curtis Dubé
Hmm.
from the Chamber of Commerce here in the US. He also had some interesting thoughts on tariffs, which I thought was intriguing because I always saw that the tariff movement was perhaps something that would give the US short-term gains, short-term boost, but
Hmm.
but maybe not from what he was talking about from the economic growth statistics, that actually maybe it's more of a long game in terms of returning more manufacturing to the US. What have you seen the impact of tariffs
Yeah,
in
I,
the US?
I was there as well, and I found his comments interesting. Right, anytime you get somebody else's perspective that's
Mm,
a little different from your own, you kind of think, okay, how does he see it? Why does he see it that way? And coming away from it, this is just my own personal thinking, was that the tariffs will have negative impacts in some segments of the market, and they'll have positive impacts in others. And so at the micro level, we probably can see quite a bit of wins and losses either way in the tariff. But he's looking at it from the macro level on the aggregate, right? So he's looking at saying, as an
right.
aggregate, how is this going to impact? And I can find specific examples where I might say, I think this particular segment of the industry is going to see a big benefit from tariffs, where another one's going to see a negative, or it's a mixed bag, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, is it's a push and pull, and there's going to be wins and losses. But on the aggregate, his feeling was it wasn't going to have as major of a short term impact. But I think in certain subsegments of the market, I think that can be quite different.
Yeah. And as a company that in your time as president, um, your company had made several acquisitions in a very short space of time. Do you see generally in the US that we will maybe expect some more consolidation, more M&A activity, or are things quiet?
Yeah, I think the one difference I see in the US, what I'd see different than in Europe is the US is a much more dynamic business environment. Um, there's more winners and losers that come along. There's more ups and downs in it, so it has more dynamicism. I guess it's I probably mispronounce it, but it's more dynamic,
Yeah.
right? And so that has a chance for both consolidation, contraction, and expansion. We'd seen the last couple of years where we've seen more foaming capacity for flexible foam come online in North America. Costs for equipment have come down. Other people look at that and they see companies like Carpenter and they say they're successful. They pour foam. So
Mm,
I want to pour my own foam because that'll help me be successful in my mattress business, let's say.
yeah.
I can't tell you whether that'll work out for them really well or not, but it does allow that there are those opportunities. And then in
Mm,
Europe, you have much more of it's more of a less dynamic market. So it's a little more things take time over in Europe.
yeah.
So in the US, I see that the chance for dynamic growth is always there. But could I say next year there's going to be consolidation or expansion? Given the tough economic conditions, I would say it's more likely for a contraction of capacity than an expansion.
Yeah.
But if things turn around and things start picking up and margins and pricing and other things improve, then you would see people saying, I think this is a good opportunity for me to invest in the business
Yes.
and expand.
Yeah. And just touching finally on the sustainability issue again, which we've covered to a certain extent. Where do you see the best future opportunities coming from in that? So, where will the industry go predominantly? Because I mean, I'm seeing a lot of interesting things here on chemical recycling,
Mhm,
advancing chemical recycling. I think Novo Loop have got a very interesting project that they're announcing in at the K show, which I interviewed them last week. And so there seems to be a lot of traction in chemical recycling. But what I've seen in the packaging industry, which has put a lot of investment into chemical recycling, there's a lot of those companies are now struggling. Um, but in polyurethane, it seems chemical recycling is a natural way to go. Um, will that be the flagship for sustainability, do you think, or will it be bio-based polyols, which seem to be an easy thing, or bio-based isocyanate? I mean,
mhm.
where do you see the best opportunities?
Well, I think if you're talking about on the front end, right, the creation of the product itself, whether that's a flexible foam, a rigid foam, a coating adhesive, I think there's always interest in what are those inputs and how renewable those inputs are or how
Mm,
much non-petroleum based they are. And so there's always interest in that. Question, of course, is the pricing, affordability, all those kind of things. So you have things like bio-based materials, you have things like mass balance, which are coming along and making a lot of progress as well. So you see that, but and I think that's all really great, but you're still making a durable good
mm,
out of it at the end of the day, and the question still comes, whether the input was done in a certain way, what do you do with at the end of its useful life? And certain things are easier than others, right? A packaging, that has a flexible polyurethane foam in it, probably easier to separate the cardboard or the wood that's with
mm,
the urethane and get the urethane back out. In a spray foam, great insulation material, but how are you getting that out of a refrigerator or out of a metal panel or out of the walls of your
mm,
house? Not as easy to think about on that side of it at the end of its useful life. So I think they all have kind of questions
yeah.
along the way. Shoe soles, right? What you start running into is the challenges of, in that case, mixed materials, which you would have seen in your packaging days, right? As a particular layer can be completely recyclable, but it's welded to another layer, and how do you separate those? And that's the thing you see in the kind of the fashion industry and shoes, where you have multiple materials. Each one of them can be individually recyclable, but how do you really effectively separate those? So it's a lot of separation and collection issues. And so I look at it and say mechanical recycling in a lot of ways is a great answer. And there's a lot of mechanical recycling being done that's really under the radar and not talked about. But ultimately, chemical recycling is going to have its role. And as you mentioned, you saw in some of your past experiences, companies get out ahead and then they fall behind and they fail for various reasons, and some succeed. But we could look at industries like biotech when it was going on, or the internet when it first came along, or even AI now.
Mm,
Right. In 5 years, we'll look back and there'll be 3 or 4 AI companies that we thought were really great that they don't exist anymore.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And that's the way chemical recycling is. It's a very wide open field with lots of ideas, really great creativity from lots of people, and some ideas will really take off and some ideas just won't pan out. And but that's the process. You've got
it's
to
almost
run through that
it's
process.
almost like you see startups lining up to kind of promote themselves to the big guys,
Sure.
come
Yeah.
and get us.
Yeah, and funding has a lot to do with it,
Yeah.
and in a condition where the chemical industry in general has been facing a worldwide kind of recession since COVID, it's a lot harder to get the funding to do it, which
Mm,
is why when I open your magazine or other Crane Communication publications, you're reading about this process over on could be PET is
yeah,
being closed down because of lack of funding,
yes,
and it's just not easy. If it was easy, everybody'd be doing it, right? And I think eventually you get there. You get there because a lot of really smart people are spending a lot of time working on it, and they'll solve those problems. But you're really moving from you know a
mm,
material that's being polymerized, right? It's being turned from a liquid in some form into a solid, and now you're saying I want to take that from a solid back into a liquid, right? It's the reverse is reverse polymerization is really a challenge, and to do it effectively, right? I mean, we could all find places where we can do it, but just in an effective way that is even realistic from a cost standpoint. So that's
yeah,
really where the industry in the next few years has to move in that direction. Some ideas will
yeah.
will ferret themselves out as being winning ideas, and some ideas will be effective, but they won't meet the cost parameters or
As you
something like
say,
that.
it's finding that sweet spot, whether it's location, supply chain,
Right.
how it all fits.
But it's really great, that a thing like the CPI is here, right?
Yeah.
Because you can come and sit downstairs and listen to all the different ideas that are out there. And there are people, big companies and small companies, he
Mm,
said, kind of putting themselves out there saying, this is the work that I'm doing. And I might sit in that room and his work might have been focused in one direction. I might look at it from my business perspective and say, I like that idea, but I want to take it in a
yeah,
different
yeah,
direction that person hadn't even been contemplating. And that I think that's where the innovation and an environment like the CPI lends itself to
mm,
is those ideas then get evolved in the process because they're
yeah,
willing to put their ideas out there for people to look at and talk about.
absolutely. Final question for you,
Sure.
Brad. What excites you most about where the industry is heading, and what keeps you up at night?
I think that's two questions. What I'm most excited about is I just think it's a really, and I have been in the industry, I mentioned, a long time. There are really great people in the industry, and ultimately, people drive the business. And people at the CPI are great to work with, but within the industry, right? I'll go downstairs and see lots of people that I know. And yes, I've been in the industry a long time, but I feel like it's very welcoming. You're meeting some people earlier today who one gal has been in the industry for 2 days, right? And you say, hey, welcome to the industry and everything else. And there's a lot of really talented people, and I think CPI is doing a really good thing. This year they're having a women's luncheon,
Mm,
which is a great thing, right? To promote that
absolutely.
ability. Mary Bogdan at Honeywell, I think you're going to talk to her later. She's been at the forefront of a lot of that stuff. But really getting all the talented people together.
Yeah.
There's the speakers that come in, but then there's also students. And you asked about the universities, right? We sponsor students to do papers and come in and give their papers, right? And so you're encouraging people
Yes.
because the industry is going to thrive with talent. So what I'm most excited about is getting those talented people in and then unleashing them in areas like sustainability or other things
Yeah.
where they can really shine and solve problems. And so, what keeps me up at night, I think just the general economy in general, right? Is polyurethanes is a great product. There's been
Yeah.
nothing else like it. It finds all kinds of niches. And you want to continue to be a great product, but we need to keep doing the right things to make sure that it's still the preferred product 90 years from now, after probably you and I, all of us are all gone, right? But you want to say, hey, are we doing the right things in the industry to put it in the right position?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Stewards for the future.
Yes, exactly.
Brad, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your time today.